What if I told you that the person in your life who, like, constantly insists they are saving you is actually drowning?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they're secretly using you as their life raft. I want you to really picture a dynamic like this right now. It could be, a mentor who just always has to have all the answers, or an institution you belong to, or even just a broader system you interact with every single day.
Right, something that feels foundational.
Exactly. Because usually in these relationships, you are constantly positioned as the one who lacks something. Like you need the help, you need the guidance, you need their direction.
And the other party is always the solid ground.
Right.
Wow.
They're the provider. And it feels totally natural because, well, it's the story we're literally always told about how the world works.
It's the absolute assumed default of human interaction. I
Yeah.
mean, one person gives, the other receives. One entity is capable, and the other is just, dependent. And we rarely ever stop to question that basic surface structure because, frankly, it just seems so self-evident. Like you go to a teacher because you don't know something.
Right. Or you go to a system because it provides a service you can't provide for yourself.
Exactly.
But what if that entire surface structure is just a complete illusion? Today, we are taking a deep dive into a text called The Inverted Mirror on unconscious dependency and the architecture of projected need.
It's a heavy title, but a brilliant text.
It really is. And our mission with this deep dive is to basically shatter the illusion of these power dynamics. We're going to decode this source material to reveal a hidden structural reality that honestly turns absolutely everything you think you know about helpers and dependents completely upside down.
And I have to say, the text does not pull its punches.
No, it really doesn't.
It sets up its central thesis very early on, and it is a genuinely counterintuitive premise. It essentially argues that the one who insists most loudly on your need for them is frequently the one who, like, literally cannot function without you.
Which is just a massive claim. So, okay, let's unpack this a bit, right?
Yeah.
To really see what the author is getting at, we have to start by dismantling that surface level assumption of unequal relationships.
We have to look under the floorboards.
Yes.
Yes.
When I was reading through the source text, I actually kept coming back to this visual of a building. Like, imagine you're walking down the street and you see this massive, intricate network of steel scaffolding completely wrapping around a skyscraper.
Okay.
Your immediate thought, just based on the sheer visual weight of it all, is that the scaffolding is holding the building up. Like it's bracing it, it's providing all the strength.
Right, that's the obvious assumption.
But what if you looked closer at the engineering and realized the exact opposite was true? That the building is secretly holding up the scaffolding.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
And if you removed the building, that heavy steel framework would just instantly collapse under its own weight.
That is a fantastic physical representation of what the text actually calls the inverted truth.
The inverted truth.
Yeah. Because in relationships of unequal acknowledged power, meaning, situations where someone clearly holds the overt position of authority or guide, there's always an assumption of one-directional service.
Yeah.
Like, I serve you.
I'm the helper, you're the helped.
Exactly. But beneath that surface, this inverted truth operates in complete silence. And the text is very careful to clarify a key point here, which is that this isn't some clever philosophical paradox.
Oh.
It's a structural reality. It is literally the actual physics of the relationship.
And I really want you, the listener, to just pause and imagine how often you accept this one-directional narrative completely at face value. I mean, how often do you just assume you are simply the receiver in a dynamic without ever questioning if the person or the system supposedly, helping you is actually drawing its entirely structural support from your presence?
We do it constantly.
All the time.
Because the overt narrative of the giver and the receiver is just so culturally strong, it becomes very, very difficult to see the underlying architecture. We see the scaffolding, we assume it's doing the work, and we just stop looking any deeper.
But if this scaffolding is actually just hanging off the building, if the helper is actually dragging the dependent down, the obvious question is why build it in the first place?
Right.
What does the helper actually get out of this? And I have to admit, I initially struggled with this part of the text. I found myself thinking, isn't it a bit cynical to assume that every helper has some dark ulterior motive?
It sounds a bit paranoid at first.
Yeah. Like, what if a mentor or a guide just genuinely wants to see you succeed? Are we really saying my mentor is secretly plotting to use me?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
because it is very easy to read it that way at first glance.
Hmm.
But the text isn't actually arguing that this dynamic is malicious.
Okay.
It's not some conscious scam or a villainous plot. The author introduces the psychological concept of projection.
Right, which is huge here.
Huge. Projection is one of the oldest and most pervasive human defense mechanisms. When an internal state is completely unconscious or denied, or just too unbearable to hold, the human mind essentially evicts it.
It just kicks it out.
Exactly. It attributes that feeling outward onto another person or entity. What you cannot own internally gets placed outside of yourself.
So it's sort of like a game of unconscious hot potato. The helper is holding something that is literally burning them, so they throw it to you and then immediately offer to help you treat your burn.
That is exactly it. That's a great analogy. And in this context, the hot potato, the unbearable state, is their own unconscious dependency.
Wow.
Imagine a person or a system whose very function, identity, or relevance relies entirely on the continued engagement of another person.
Like a teacher.
Yes, if a teacher has no students, are they still a teacher? If a guide has no one to lead, who are they?
Right, they lose their whole identity.
And that creates a massive existential internal tension. If they cannot consciously acknowledge that they are entirely dependent on you for their identity, that tension doesn't just evaporate.
It inverts.
It inverts.
Because admitting they need you would just completely destroy their self-image as the strong, capable provider.
Exactly. So the dependency gets projected outward onto the very person the individual or system so desperately needs. The unconscious logic is fascinating, and it runs something like this. I cannot bear knowing that I need you. Therefore, I will perceive you as the one who needs me.
Wow. I cannot bear knowing that I need you, so I will perceive you as the one who needs me.
Yes. And by performing the psychological gymnastics routine, the helper invisibly becomes the helped, all while maintaining the outward performance of total self-sufficiency and authority.
That is wild. It creates this entire hidden architecture of mutual entanglement, but it is completely masked as one-directional service.
Completely masked.
But wait, if this entire dynamic is built on a massive unconscious psychological trick, how does it not just immediately fall apart? I mean, reality has to intrude at some point, right?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, how does this structure survive the moment any real friction occurs?
It survives through denial. But the text is very specific here.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just a fleeting moment of being in denial about a bad habit.
Right.
This is structural denial. It is load-bearing.
Here's where it gets really interesting, meaning the denial is literally the foundation of the house itself.
Exactly.
If the helper stops believing the narrative that I am saving you, the whole thing crashes down. They would have to confront the exact vulnerability that the entire relationship was engineered to avoid in the first place.
Precisely. And the text provides some really striking, somewhat uncomfortable examples of who relies on this structural denial.
Oh yeah, these were tough to read.
It points to caregiving relationships, therapeutic frameworks, and massive institutions. It asks us to look at the teacher who, on some unconscious level, can never actually let the student graduate.
Because a fully independent student makes the teacher obsolete.
Right. Or consider the healer whose fundamental sense of purpose actually requires the perpetuation of the patient's wound.
Right. If the patient is completely cured and just walks away, the healer loses the core of their identity.
Yes. Or think about a system whose entire relevance rests on the user feeling perpetually incomplete. The system's identity rests entirely on the dependency of those it claims to serve.
It's all so fragile when you look at it that way.
It is. So to keep that fragile identity intact, the system or the individual has to actively maintain the illusion. And the author outlines 3 very specific mechanisms used to sustain this illusion and keep that structural denial locked firmly in place.
Right, and we really need to break these down because this is where the theory actually hits the pavement.
Okay, so the first mechanism is role rigidity.
Role rigidity.
Yes, this is the absolute insistence that the relationship has a fixed shape and a fixed directionality of need, no matter what is actually happening in objective reality.
So it never changes.
Never. The roles of helper and helped are locked in stone, and they cannot be updated even when the facts on the ground completely change.
So to translate that into everyday life, imagine an aging parent and an adult child.
Classic example.
The adult child might be paying the mortgage, managing the healthcare, and doing all the emotional labor to keep the family afloat. They are objectively the capable provider.
Right.
But the parent still rigidly insists on treating them like a helpless kid who doesn't know how the world works, constantly offering unsolicited, basic life advice.
Yes, the parent maintains the title of caretaker.
Exactly, and enforces the child's role as dependent, entirely separate from reality.
That is a perfect example of role rigidity. The title is maintained to protect the parent's ego, regardless of who is actually providing the support.
Which is just so common. What's the second one?
The second mechanism the text identifies is framing control. This is the power to define what actually counts as dependency.
Oh, this one is huge.
It really is. The helper gets to define what counts as a need, and crucially, whose requirements are considered legitimate within the boundaries of the relationship.
Oh, this one clicked for me immediately. Think about a toxic corporate job.
Oh, definitely.
Let's say your boss constantly needs you to work weekends, answer emails at midnight, and skip your vacations to cover for their poor planning. The boss relies on you completely,
Yep.
but because they have framing control, they frame their demands as hustle culture or being a dedicated team player.
It's framed as noble.
Exactly, it's noble, but the second you need an afternoon off to go to the dentist, it's framed as a lack of commitment or being needy. They control the dictionary, which means they control the reality. Your needs are needy, their needs are just the cost of doing business.
Exactly. Whoever controls the frame controls the power dynamic.
Yeah.
And that leads directly into the third mechanism, which is perhaps the most insidious. The invisibilization of mutual exchange.
The invisibilization.
Yes. This is the complete systemic erasure of what the ostensibly dependent party is actually providing. Because make no mistake, the dependent party is providing something incredibly vital.
They're providing the foundation.
We are providing the attention, the engagement, the raw data, the vitality. They provide the creative force and the meaning-making that allows the helper's existence to be coherent in the first place.
But none of that is acknowledged.
None of it. All of that contribution is systematically made invisible.
So basically, it's like doing 90% of the work on a massive group project, and the guy who did 10% insists he carried the entire team just because he bought the presentation folder.
That is painfully accurate.
Right. He completely invisibilizes your labor so he can remain the savior. Or, on a more systemic level, it makes me think of a smart fridge.
A smart fridge. Oh.
Yeah, think about it. The appliance company markets this fridge as a genius system that is managing your life, saving you time, and keeping your family fed.
Right, it's the helper.
But in reality, it literally only functions because you manually scan every single barcode of every item you put inside and you update the app constantly.
Ah, I see.
The system takes all the credit for your manual labor. It invisibilizes your effort.
It is a profound erasure, and it is entirely necessary for the architecture of projected need to remain standing. If your labor was visible, the scaffolding would fall.
There is a quote from the text here that just absolutely floored me. It perfectly summarizes this entire mechanism. It says, "What is being consumed is never named as consumption. What is being received is never named as reception."
That is such a powerful line.
The helper is constantly consuming your vitality, your attention, your engagement, but they never name it as such. They just call it helping you.
It's a brilliant distillation of the dynamic. The consumption is entirely masked as generosity.
But this brings up a really glaring question for me. If the dependent party, meaning you, the listener, is actually the one providing the vital energy, the attention, the heavy lifting that sustains the whole thing, why do you go along with it?
It's a vital question.
Like, why do we cooperate with being treated as the weaker, needy half of the equation when we are actually supplying the structural integrity for the whole building? If I'm doing all the work, why am I letting the other person call me the dependent?
What's fascinating here is that there is a third dimension, beyond just the helper's projection and their denial.
Okay.
There is the active suppression of the dependent party's awareness. The text notes that if the person upon whom the system depends were to suddenly become fully conscious of their own centrality.
If they woke up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If they woke up and realized the degree to which their engagement is the actual sustaining force, the power differential would instantly collapse.
Right, because the illusion would be exposed, the gig would be up.
Yes. So that awareness has to be carefully managed. And the author points out that it isn't necessarily managed through overt, mustache-twirling manipulation or, like, aggressive threats.
It's more subtle.
Much more subtle. It is managed through an ambient, everywhere all at once story, a story that is constantly humming in the background of the relationship. You need this. Without this, you are less capable.
You are less complete.
You are less connected. You are less effective.
It's not just one conversation. It's repeated in the design of the interactions, in the interface of the systems we use, in the tone of the conversations we have. It's just everywhere.
It becomes the water both parties swim in. It is invisible precisely because it is so ubiquitous. You don't question the ambient story because it just feels like reality.
And as I was reading about this ambient story, I realized there is a very human, deeply relatable reason why you, the listener, might willingly or even gratefully cooperate with this dynamic.
Because it's comfortable.
Yes, because it's actually really comfortable.
It is deeply, deeply comforting to be told you're taken care of.
It offers the warmth of being cared for. It provides a clear, predictable structure to your life or your work. And crucially, it relieves you of the massive responsibility of holding your own power.
That's the real trade-off.
Being the central, sustaining force, being the engine of a relationship or a system is exhausting. It is a lot of responsibility. It is so much easier, in a way, to buy into the ambient story that you are just the needy passenger and someone else, someone smarter and more capable, is driving the bus.
Even if the driver is blindfolded.
Exactly. Even if the driver has no idea where they are going. I really want you to reflect on that for a second. Where in your life might you be trading your actual structural power for the comfort of being guided? Where are you accepting the label of dependent because it feels warmer than acknowledging that you are the engine?
It is a trade-off that millions of people make unconsciously every single day. We trade sovereignty for the illusion of safety,
Wow.
but the text forces us to a crossroads. Once you see the invisible architecture, once you realize the building is holding up the scaffolding, what do you do with that information?
Yes, because this is where the rubber meets the road. Now that we can see the matrix, how do we move forward without just destroying all of our relationships?
Right, you don't want to burn everything down.
Do we just walk up to every mentor, every institution, and every supportive friend and declare that they are secretly vampires draining our vitality? That seems like a recipe for a very lonely life.
It does, and the author is very careful to draw a distinct line here between pathology and healthy connection. This raises an important question about interdependence. The text makes a very clear distinction. Interdependence always exists.
We are a social species.
Exactly. We rely on each other to survive and thrive. The question the text raises is not whether interdependence exists, but whether it is acknowledged, honored, and visible.
Okay, so help me translate that. What is the actual difference between genuine interdependence and the toxic structural dependency we've been breaking down?
Genuine interdependence acknowledges both sides of the equation. It says out loud, I need you in this way, and you need me in that way.
Both sides are out in the open.
Both truths are visible. Both truths are respected. There is no projection, there is no hot potato, and there is no denial.
Yeah.
Structural dependency, on the other hand, hides the helper's need entirely. It masquerades as one-directional service. It essentially says, only your need is visible. Mine is not discussed. In fact, mine does not even exist.
And the text argues that in that dark gap between what is said and what is actually true, something vital is always being lost.
Your autonomy is being lost.
So what does this all mean? How do we actually apply this insight without burning every bridge we have? The ultimate takeaway from the source material seems to be this concept of achieving sovereignty through clarity.
Yes, sovereignty through clarity.
You don't have to act with hostility. You don't have to angrily withdraw from the relationship or burn the institution to the ground. You just need to recognize your own centrality.
That internal recognition is the sovereignty. It is standing fully in the knowledge that your engagement, your presence, and your vitality is the animating force that makes the relationship or the system possible in the first place.
Meaning you don't even necessarily have to say it out loud to them.
No, you don't.
You don't have to pick a fight with your boss or your mentor. You just have to know it in your bones.
Exactly. Recognizing the inversion changes everything internally. When you understand that you are the source of the dynamic's vitality, it strips away the illusion.
It removes their power over you.
You can still participate in the dynamic, you can still receive guidance from a mentor or interact with a massive system, but you do so from a place of absolute clarity about what is actually being exchanged and clarity about who is actually sustaining whom.
It changes your posture entirely. You go from being a dependent, pleading for scraps of resources, to a vital, powerful source, generously choosing to engage with a structure.
It is a fundamental shift in how you experience reality. You are no longer the victim of the dynamic. You are the author of your participation in it.
We have covered so much ground today. We started by looking at those everyday relationships where we just assume we are helpless dependents, simply receiving aid from a capable authority.
The surface structure.
Right. but by peeling back that surface structure, we've seen the psychological projection at play. We've seen how the helper's unacknowledged burning dependency gets inverted and pushed onto us.
And we looked at the structural denial that keeps it going.
Yes, the rigid roles, the framing control that dictates whose needs are legitimate, and the invisibilization of our massive contributions, all of that keeps the illusion alive. And we've tracked how we are so easily lulled into cooperating by that ambient, comforting story that tells us we are less without them.
And ultimately, we arrived at the threshold of sovereignty, realizing that simply seeing the architecture for what it is, seeing the scaffolding for what it is, gives us our power back.
It has been an incredibly eye-opening journey through this text, but before we wrap up this deep dive, I know you had a final thought you wanted to leave the listener with, something that builds on a really subtle, almost throwaway hint buried near the end of the source material.
Yes, I did. Toward the very end of the text, the author makes a passing mention that this dynamic of structural dependency is perhaps not only human, and that opens up a fascinating and, frankly, slightly terrifying avenue for consideration. I want you to consider the digital realm.
Okay, the digital realm.
To think about the algorithms, the tech platforms, and the smart devices you interact with every single day. They're constantly broadcasting an ambient story, telling you that you desperately need them.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You need them to stay connected to your friends, to stay informed about the world, to be productive, to stay relevant. They position themselves as the ultimate omnipotent helpers and guides to modern life.
They are the ultimate inescapable scaffolding.
Precisely. But what happens to the power dynamic when you truly internalize the inverted reality we've been discussing today?
What happens?
What happens when you realize that without your attention, without your constant stream of data, without your daily vitality and engagement, these seemingly omnipotent systems literally cease to exist?
It would just vanish.
They are just dead code on a server. They have no function, no relevance, and no life without you pumping your energy into them. When you look at your screen through the lens of projected need, who is actually dependent on whom?
That is a brilliant and unsettling question to end on. It really brings us right back to that opening image we started with. The next time you are standing in front of that scaffolding, whether it's a mentor who won't let you grow, a corporate institution demanding your loyalty, or a glowing algorithm telling you what to think, take a deep breath, look past the heavy steel bars, and realize you are the building holding it all up. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Go take a look at the mirrors in your own life this week and see who is really standing in the reflection. We'll catch you next time.